So this is the first video in the Yoga Sutras of Pantanjali study course offered by Dr. Lisa Love. And this particular video is on Book 1, Sutra 1. There are 4 books in the Yoga Sutras, each divided into a number of different sutras or sayings. This is a comparative study course, and we're going to be using 3 different books. The ones by B.K.S. Iyengar, Light on the Yoga Sutras of Pantanjali, the one by Swami Satchidananda, the Yoga Sutras of Pantanjali, and also Alice Bailey, the Light of the Soul, the Yoga Sutras of Pantanjali. So let's start out with the first sutra, which essentially is trying to answer the question, what is yoga? And there are a variety of ways to translate the Sanskrit, and the scholars that I have chosen translate them all a little bit differently, these sutras. And it's interesting because I have read about 10 different versions of the Yoga Sutras, and there's always slight variations no matter who is the author. But here are our 3 translations, starting with, now the exposition of yoga is being made by Swami Satchidananda. This sutra is translated by B.K.S. Iyengar, pretty much the same. Now the exposition of yoga is being made, but by Alice Bailey is slightly different, starting with the words Om and saying the following instruction concerns the science of union. So what does this sutra mean? There are a few ways to look at it. First of all, the word now is seen in 2 of our translations. So now, or perhaps next, we are finally ready for yoga. Why now? Perhaps because the Yoga Sutras were next in a series of study by Pantanjali, and now we are ready to move on to study them next. Or perhaps because by diving into this study, you yourself are now ready. So there's a few different ways to look at that word now. And then, what is yoga? Ultimately, yoga is the science of union. And the Yoga Sutras are an exposition or series of instructions that help you obtain union with the self that, paradoxically, you already are. That self has been called by many names. It is known as your essential self, true self, essence, Christ consciousness, Buddha nature, I am consciousness, and other names, and I call it the peaceful self. In essence, you are always this self. You have simply forgotten it, and yoga helps you rejoin or remember that peaceful self within. So let's look at the ways that the 3 books interpret this sutra. And there are translations in these books that are often much more extensive than I can do in these videos, or these videos would go on forever. So if you are doing this course of study, especially if you're doing it with me, please pick up these books and follow along and read the thorough commentaries, because I'm only giving summaries. So once again, here is what Swami Satchidananda says about the translation of the Sanskrit of this sutra. And here are some of his key thoughts. He is reminding us that yoga and the Yoga Sutras are, quote, about something you practice, not something you study or philosophize about, end of quote. Why? Because yoga is about self-realization. In order to realize it, you need to put forth the effort. You need to have the experience of the self you really are. You know it. You do not simply contemplate, study, or theorize about it, which is why I'm going through the laborious process, but it's a labor of joy and love, of creating a video of a meditation for you to follow with each sutra. To my knowledge, that has not been done in a public way before, and I'm happy to do it, but I'm doing it because the point is to practice. You can't lose weight by simply studying about how to lose weight. You've got to go to the gym, you've got to work out, you've got to take yoga, asana practice, you need to eat better. There are things you have to do in order to realize your weight loss goals. The same is true in yoga in its true meaning. Its true meaning is remembering the self that you are. There are many different forms of yoga. That was in the introduction to this yoga series. But this is something you have to practice. You have to do in order to realize it. Here's what BKS Iyengar has to say. He asserts that we start with the word now because Patanjali was saying that this book, the Yoga Sutras, was an extension of 2 other books he wrote, one on grammar and one on Ayurveda. Iyengar also states, and here's a quote from Iyengar, this book starts with the need for a disciplined code of conduct to educate us towards spiritual poise and peace under all circumstances. End of quote. That's one reason why I call it the Peaceful Self process. And I'm using different methods than the Yoga Sutras in my official Peaceful Self process. This is a more extensive method in terms of the Yoga Sutras. But the point is that in knowing who we are as the self, we obtain an increased level of spiritual poise and peace, ideally to the point where it's under all circumstances. Then another quote by Iyengar, Patanjali describes the fluctuations, modifications, and modulations of thought which distort consciousness, and then sets out the various disciplines by which they may be stilled. End of quote. So one of the major things that Book 1 is about is the modifications of the mind stuff. Why is it that we don't know who we are as the self? Why is it that we know and then we forget, and then we have to remember again? Why does that happen? But more than that, what are the various disciplines? That's the yoga that we can undergo so that that awareness is stabilized. We no longer remember, forget. We know under all circumstances who we are. Here's the commentary by Alice Bailey. And she starts her interpretation of the sutra in a different way than the others. She begins with the sacred word of Om, or AUM. This is the universal primordial sound underlying all that is. Then Bailey goes on to share that yoga, as practiced in the Yoga Sutras, is really a form of Raja Yoga, the kingly yoga. And we talked about the different forms of yoga in the intro video to this series, so I invite you to review that. Then she shares how if yoga is the science of union, then the primary question to be answered is union with what or whom? And she indicates, as to the others, that yoga is about self-realization, something we've already spoken about. And again, the paradox here is we're realizing the self that we already are. That's who we are, and we've simply forgotten it because of the modifications of the mind stuff, which Book 1 of the Yoga Sutras goes in depth into. And once we learn how to still those modifications, we no longer forget. So that's the brief introduction of our comparative study of Book 1, Sutra 1. Now, as promised, there's a meditation with all of these videos. So please look for the Who Am I video and follow that. If you are taking this study course with me, then here's how I recommend you go through it. Please review these instructions in this video, and then also, if you want to know more about me, follow the next slide, and if you want to contact me, you can follow the slide after that. Thank you for watching.